So, types of fraud. The accounts payable function can be exposed to risk in a number of different ways. This list is by no means exhaustive, but we've identified the most common areas in risk as follows. Phishing scams. They're an attempt to access files, funds, or confidential information by posing as a trusted source or individual. According to a recent study, Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, 22% of data breaches involved phishing scams. Duplicate payments are one of the top payment-related pain points, according to Lavelle Research report. Manual AP processes make it easy for a single human error to result in a vendor being paid twice for the same invoice. And of course, expense abuse. So this occurs when an employee exploits a company's expense policy for personal gain. A 2022 survey conducted by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners found that expense reimbursement fraud constituted approximately 14% of all fraud cases reported. So what does AP fraud look like? Well, it doesn't just happen to the little fish. Some of the world's most powerful companies are susceptible to AP fraud. Between 2023 and 2025, Google and Facebook were hit with a phishing scam that took them for upwards of $100 million. The scammers set up fake accounts using the details of a trusted vendor and sent phishing emails to Google and Facebook employees. Employees at both companies were used to processing multi-million-dollar transactions with this company and didn't think to question if the emails were legit. Scams like this can be hard to detect, but through approval workflows, we can help minimize the risk that you might get duped. However, for AP teams, the risk doesn't end with external threats. For example, in this one Oregon-based company saw more than $4.5 million embezzled over the course of a decade. The culprit was one of their own employees who was accused of submitting fraudulent invoices for a fake vendor. According to reports, this employee would generate checks in AP to pay the false vendor, using her position to direct those payments to her personal account. Such examples demonstrate how fraud can originate in the AP department, and without proper checks in place, they can go undetected for years. Expense abuse. It's unlikely to run to the millions of dollars, but it's an example of AP fraud most companies have likely experienced and another major pain point for CFOs. Take a look at this example from Bob, Chief Financial Officer at Melio Consulting. Speaking on expense abuse, Bob recalled, the most glaring case I uncovered involved a sales rep who for many months expensed $250 to $400 in lunches and dinners. The employee claimed that he was entertaining several prospects at a time during these dinners, but during an audit, I randomly matched his calendar dates to meals on his expense report, only to find his calendar empty. So Bob called up the restaurant on the sales rep's receipts and found these were all receipts for meals served to a table for two. So Bob immediately informed HR and investigated meal expenses for the past 12 months. The total amount of abuse was in the thousands. So we want to trust that our own teams and employees will do the right thing and use corporate expense accounts responsibly. But in reality, expense abuse is one of the most common forms of fraud, and it really is the hardest to detect. So we're now in what could broadly be termed the post-COVID era. But with a likely recession on the way, businesses can't afford to simply pat themselves on the back for surviving the pandemic. Fraudsters are ruthless and will take any opportunity to attack a vulnerable target. In times of crisis, the rate of fraud increases, while busy, overstressed employees are more vulnerable to attack. Consider some of these recent statistics. So in a recent study, 84% of employees said their organization had experienced at least one successful email-based phishing attack last year. The same study reported a 76% increase in direct financial loss from successful phishing attacks, and yet only 25% of employees double check an invoice before making a payment. That was the scary part. The AP automation function is a risk of fraud, and potential consequences are significant. But what can you do about it? In this section, we'll explore how to prevent fraud, including phishing scams, vendor management liability, and expense abuse. So we'll examine some of the techniques you can employ to shore up these vulnerabilities and discuss how AP automation can support your fraud prevention efforts. So as we saw earlier, a sophisticated phishing attack might target your company with an invoice, which at first glance seems completely legitimate. To prevent a successful phishing attack, we recommend you have at least 2 levels of approval, one by a manager and the other by the purchaser. Always ensure that any purchase is approved by someone other than the person who purchased the goods. A robust approval workflow should ensure that an employee's manager approves any purchase and that the finance department has final approval. Looking for signs of scam. The approval process is about getting multiple sets of eyes on an invoice, but what should you be looking for? The domain name. Scammers will attempt to replicate the domain names of trusted vendors, but there are actually subtle differences. So double check the domain name of any correspondence and look for telltale discrepancies. Email providers. Similarly, check any correspondence that has come via a business email address, not a free provider like Gmail or Outlook. Missing information on an invoice, like addresses, phone numbers, can be a sign that the invoice hasn't come from a trusted sender. And supplier purchase prices that appear too high or too low can also be a red flag. AP automation can help establish processes that reduce your vulnerability to phishing attacks. So with AP automation solutions, we let you set custom rules so you can automate and view every step of your team's AP workflow so nothing slips through undetected. With AP automation, you can easily establish multi-level approval channels and route approvals to the right team member at the right time. And of course, AP automation solutions allow you to establish a separate payments workflow, effectively another approval channel that allows you to easily verify which invoices have been paid and which haven't. So vendor management. It creates potential vulnerabilities that could expose your company for fraud. And ways to manage your risk are creating a vendor bank change form. So there's a formal process in place whenever a vendor wishes to change their banking details. Use positive pay to detect forged and altered and counterfeit checks. Implement a contact management and escalation procedure to ensure that only one trusted person in the vendor organization can affect changes. So AP automation supports vendor management by accelerating reconciliation, providing a third-party payments liability so you can reclaim payments in the event of fraud, delivering the ability to outsource vendor data management to protect sensitive information when dealing with third parties. And of course, AP automation providers can also manage vendor and bank onboarding on your behalf. It's also important to remember that most third-party payment solutions will identify 100% of the vendor payments. So we've discussed how expense abuse represents one of the most significant risk areas for the AP automation team. But there are a few steps you can take to combat it. We recommend auditing employee expenses on a regular basis. In Bob's example from earlier in our session, we saw how regular auditing can reveal irregularities that help detect expense abuse. Make sure that your expense policy is clear and that your employees have agreed to it. Employees are less likely to commit expense abuse when they can't plead ignorance, while clear, well-communicated policies are harder to exploit. And finally, we recommend that you adopt a thorough approval accountability procedure. Multi-level approval workflows can help safeguard against fraud and expense abuse, as well as the kind of human error that results in late or duplicate payments. And AP automation is a highly effective tool to combat expense abuse. AP automation solutions create a searchable digital audit trail, providing full visibility over the audit process. AP automation allows employees to upload expenses via a mobile app for near instant review and approval, meaning you'll never lose another receipt. And you can also gain full visibility into employees' spending patterns, helping you spot inconsistencies that could be the sign of expense abuse. So once organizations adopt an AP automation solution, they greatly improve their risk management capabilities through improved visibility, tracking, and control of invoice and payment processes. You can establish thorough approval workflows that can help prevent and identify fraud, manage your vendors in a way that's safe and compliant, and take control of your expense procedures.